Have you ever stumbled across a story online that hits you so hard it doesn't even feel like just some random post? Today I was scrolling through Reddit and found a few stories like that. Way too real, way too creepy to ignore. I've got a feeling you're going to want to hear these. So, no more waiting, let's dive right in.
Story 1.
Have you ever heard of the museum that doesn't want visitors? No, I'm not speaking in riddles. There's a place in the city that exists, but only at night. Not on maps, not on blogs, not even in the memories of those who drive past it daily. A building that refuses to be remembered. They call it the Midnight Museum, and it's where my nightmare began. Tell me, have you ever fed a gargoyle at 1:13 a.m.? Or followed a hallway where the footsteps behind you match your own, step for step, breath for breath? I have. And I'm still here to tell you why that might have been a mistake. When I got the job at the city's museum, I didn't question why they were hiring for the night shift. I needed the money, and honestly, I didn't mind the idea of spending my evenings in silence. In fact, I preferred it. No ringing phones, no angry customers, just me, a flashlight, and a few centuries of dust. The job came through a classified site I don't even remember browsing. The listing was vague: night security needed. Discreet position. Immediate start. It felt peculiar. But my rent was 3 weeks overdue, and peculiar pays the same as normal. When I showed up, the museum looked exactly like what you'd expect in a horror movie, a kind of building the camera slowly pans toward while the music grows colder. It was a Gothic stone structure buried in an alleyway between forgotten bookshops and boarded-up antique stores. Iron gates, mossy walls, windows like dead eyes. No banners, no signs, no life. Inside, it smelled like wet parchment and something faintly metallic like dried blood. I met Mr. Harlan, the curator. He looked like he had grown out of the museum walls. Tall, gaunt, skin papery thin. His handshake was firm, but there was no warmth in it, just obligation. "You're punctual," he said. "That's good. Time is very important around here." He handed me a sheet of yellowed paper. It looked older than the museum itself, corners curling, words typed on a typewriter long dead. The title read, "Rules for the Midnight Museum." He told me to read them carefully. And I did. I read them aloud now, so you can understand how madness sounds when it's disguised as procedure. 1. Do not let anyone in after the doors are locked at 11 p.m. No exceptions. 2. Check the paintings in the East Wing every hour. If any have changed, call Mr. Harlan immediately. 3. At exactly 1:13 a.m., feed the gargoyle in the courtyard coin. Any coin will do. 4. Do not look directly at the mannequin in the Victorian exhibit. Keep it in your peripheral vision only. 5. If you hear footsteps behind you in the main hall, do not turn around. Continue walking. 6. The lights in the ancient artifact room may flicker. If the red lights turn on between 3 o'clock and 3:15 a.m., go to the ancient artifact room and whisper your name backwards. Do not forget your own name. If you do, it will be replaced. 7. 8. Never sit in a chair that wasn't there before. 9. Don't go anywhere you don't remember, heading toward or feel pulled to. If you hear yourself from a place you are not, do not respond. It is lonely, and it is learning. 10. If you see a mirror, don't stare. Don't try to fix it. If your reflection doesn't show in 5 seconds, walk away. If something else shows up, walk faster. 11. If you're given a performance review at night, don't argue. Don't speak. Accept it and stay still. 12. If the painting calls to you, do not turn around. If it asks to be seen, cover your eyes. If it begins to move, run whether your legs agree or not. 13. There's no lady inside. If you hear her voice, it's already too late. You belong to the museum. 14. If you hear yourself from a place you're not, do not respond. It is lonely, and it is learning. I let out a dry laugh. Is this some kind of initiation prank? Mr. Harlan didn't blink. He didn't smirk. His voice was flat and steady, like someone who's given up trying to be understood. These rules are not a joke. Break even one, and this place will show you things you're not meant to see. He said that last part softly, almost like a confession. I nodded slowly, but a chill rippled down my spine. The kind of chill your instincts send when your brain is too arrogant to run. You'll be alone, he added, but not entirely. Then he turned and walked away, his footsteps swallowed by the velvet carpet. That night, I sat in the security office, holding the list in trembling fingers. The halls were quiet, the museum asleep, but I wasn't. Every tick of the antique clock on the wall felt like a heartbeat. The first hour was quiet, too quiet, not peaceful predatory, like the walls themselves were waiting for something. At 12:07 a.m., I made my first round. I moved through each wing slowly, my flashlight the only source of light cutting through the thick, oppressive dark. The exhibits stared back at me with blank, dusty faces, old bones under glass, taxidermy birds frozen mid-screech, swords that hadn't drawn blood in centuries. Then I reached the East Wing, a long corridor of oil paintings. Portraits of nobles, clergy, military commanders, each one with eyes that were almost too detailed. Their gazes followed me as I passed, their stares tinged with contempt. No, that's not the right word. Hunger. I checked each painting, just like the rules said. Nothing seemed out of place until the fifth frame on the left. It was a woman in red mid-1800s, hair pinned high, lips curved in a faint smile. I swear, in the corner of her mouth, something had changed. Her smile was a little wider. I shook it off. Just nerves. A trick of the light. I moved on. At exactly 1:12 a.m., I stepped into the courtyard. The cold hit harder out there. The air was heavy, like fog made of iron. In the center stood the gargoyle, hunched stone creature, perched atop a pedestal, wings folded, mouth open in a frozen snarl. It was ugly and beautiful in the way nightmares are detailed, expressive, ancient. I remembered the third rule. At exactly 1:13 a.m., feed the gargoyle in the courtyard coin. Any coin will do. I pulled a tarnished old coin from my pocket and waited. The minute hand ticked forward. 1:13. I dropped the coin into its mouth, and the courtyard shifted. Not visually audibly, like the sound around me warped. The birds in the trees stopped chirping. The distant hum of the city vanished. Even the wind seemed to go silent. Then a faint rumble, as if the stone creature was purring. I didn't wait around. I turned and walked back inside. Back in the office, I stared at the rule sheet again. Why coins? Why 113? Why did the museum behave like it was alive? I didn't know yet, but something inside me whispered that the rules weren't just guidelines. They were rituals, offerings, bargains, and I had just made my first one. At 1:46 a.m., I had just left the Egyptian exhibit when I heard them. Footsteps, behind me, heavy, deliberate, mimicking mine perfectly. I stopped. They stopped. I took a slow step forward. Another pair echoed behind me. Same rhythm, same pace. My throat tightened. Rule number 5 flashed in my mind. If you hear footsteps behind you in the main hall, do not turn around. Continue walking. So I walked, slowly, through that massive, marble-floored hall, past statues of Roman emperors with broken noses and Greek goddesses missing arms. The footsteps stayed behind me the entire time, breathing in my rhythm, walking in my shadow. It was the longest 30 seconds of my life. I reached the other side and opened the door to the West Wing. The footsteps didn't follow. I turned around. No one was there. I kept walking. Eventually, I reached the Victorian exhibit, and there it stood. Rule 4's nightmare. Do not look directly at the mannequin in the Victorian exhibit. Keep it in your peripheral vision only. A tall mannequin dressed in mourning black lace gloves, a veil over her pale face, standing beside a fake coffin. I kept my eyes on the floor, only catching her outline from the corner of my eye. But as I passed her, she moved, just slightly, a twitch in the hand, a tilt of the head. Still, I didn't look, because something deep in my gut told me that if I met her eyes, she'd move forever. I made it back to the office. My hands were shaking. I wasn't sure if I had done everything right, but I was still breathing. Then I saw it, a piece of parchment resting on my desk. It wasn't there before. It read, one rule was nearly broken. Be careful. The museum notices. There was no signature, just a crimson wax seal, still warm to the touch. Oh my God, I breathed over and over. My legs gave out. I tried to sit, just rest a bit. I hadn't broken any rules yet. The footsteps, the gargoyle, the mannequin, everything had obeyed the pattern, as if the museum wanted me to learn. But then my eyes grew heavy. I hadn't noticed how exhausted I was. Just 5 minutes, I told myself. The office chair was cold, the silence absolute. I closed my eyes. That's when the breathing started. It wasn't my own breath. No, it was closer. Veta, shallower. Like something with lungs far too small was right in front of me. I snapped awake and the lights were off. I hadn't turned them off. I never sleep with the lights off. The room was pitch black, but I could still feel it. Something was in there with me. A whisper rose from the darkness. It wasn't words exactly. It was the suggestion of a voice. Breathy, malicious, familiar. You almost broke rule number 7. I bolted upright and grabbed my flashlight, flicking at nothing. No one was there. But on the wall across from me, something had been written in faint condensation. Never sleep inside the museum. I checked the rule sheet again. I hadn't noticed the last one before it was scribbled on the back in frantic handwriting. Rule 7, do not fall asleep. Not even for a minute. If you do not speak to the thing that wakes you. I hadn't spoken. I hoped that was enough. And suddenly, as if summoned by fear itself, the emergency lights in the ancient artifact room started blinking red. I wasn't sure what triggered it. There were no sensors, no storms, no power failures. Still, red light flooded the hallway. I remembered the guideline that was in the printed rules. If the red lights turn on between 3 o'clock and 3:15 a.m., go to the ancient artifact room and whisper your name backwards. Do not forget your own name. If you do, it will be replaced. It sounded ridiculous, but after everything that had happened, I didn't question it. I walked down the long hallway, red pulses lighting the display cases like a heartbeat. 3:07 a.m. I stood in front of the oldest artifactable of obsidian fragments believed to be pre-Sumerian. No one knew what it had been used for. I knelt. I whispered, Samaj my name, backwards, exactly as instructed. The lights stopped blinking, but something answered. It came from the obsidian bowl, not out loud in my mind. A voice like breaking mirrors said, you remember? So you are still you. For now. My skin went ice cold. I felt watched from every direction like the glass cases had eyes. 3:10 a.m. The door behind me creaked open. I turned my head just slightly and saw nothing. But in the reflection of the obsidian bowl, there was a man standing behind me, completely still, wearing a registrar's coat. Only the museum hasn't had a registrar in 20 years. I ran, not a brave walk, not a fast jog. I ran back to the office, slamming the door behind me. I sat down, out of breath, and found another note. Same parchment, same red seal. This one read, they are impressed, but do not grow arrogant. The museum loves the clever, but it feasts on the proud. And then, scratched into the wood of the desk beneath it, you've been seen. I was afraid to even blink now. The museum was no longer testing, it was toying with me. Everything seemed quiet again. Too quiet. That's when I remember the mirror. Not just any mirror. The mirror with no reflection. They'd also warned me about it during training. Don't look too long. Don't try to fix it. If your reflection doesn't appear within 5 seconds, walk away. If something else appears, walk faster. At first, I thought it was a myth. Now, I had to find out for myself. I made my way toward the east wing, toward an exhibit no guest was ever allowed to see. The Hall of Forgotten Faces. A collection of antique mirrors from cultures that don't exist on any map. I passed at least a dozen strange glass panels until I reached the one in the center. Tall, silver-framed, dull, no dust, no reflection, just cold emptiness. I stood there. 5 seconds. Nothing. Then on the 6th second something moved. But it wasn't me. It tilted its head slowly. Its shape was like mine, but not quite. Shoulders too wide, eyes too far apart, and its grinnet was grinning before I even felt afraid. You've looked too long, it said without moving its lips. I stepped back. Too late. I ran, but not before seeing something in the corner of the glass. My reflection. Catching up. I didn't stop running until I reached the basement stairwell. I didn't mean to go there. I didn't even remember heading in that direction. But I heard a voice down the Remy voice, calling out, hey, come down here. I dropped my keys. I need help. I froze. I was standing at the top of the stairs. The voice below matched my pitch, tone even my hesitation. But I was very much upstairs. So who or what was mimicking me from below? Another rule clicked in my mind. If you hear yourself from a place you are not, do not respond. It is lonely, and it is learning. I backed away slowly. The voice called again. You're supposed to help me. You said you would. Still my voice. Come on, James. We don't have much time. I never said my name aloud. As I backed away, the lights flickered. A loud chime rang out through the museum speakers. Once, twice, 3 times. That was not normal. Then a voice I hadn't heard before, flat, mechanical, museum-like, he announced. Commencing. Silence test. 3:40 a.m. to 3:50 a.m. No sound above 30 decibels is permitted. That's a whisper. A soft one. If I made a noise louder than a breath, I didn't want to know what would happen. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out slowly. An alert. Do not breathe heavily. Do not drop this device. Do not panic. I stood still in the hallway, not breathing, not blinking. Then, of course, a statue fell in the next room. Loud, crashing, bone-breaking loud. But it wasn't me. Still, the silence test didn't care. The air grew denser, heavier, like gravity had tripled. From the shadows down the hall, something slid forward. Not walk slid. A tall figure in black. No feet, no face. Only long arms and a golden tuning fork in its hand. Every few seconds, it would strike the fork against the wall. Tai-ying then turned. Listening. Searching. I had to stay absolutely still. But my heart was pounding so loudly, I thought it might count as a scream. At 3:48 a.m., it stopped, right in front of me, inches away. The tuning fork glowed slightly. It tilted its head, as if listening to my thoughts. Then, just as suddenly, it vanished. The speaker announced, silence test complete. Resume movement. Resume breath. I collapsed to the floor. I didn't even realize I'd been holding my breath the entire time. And just then, another note, folded under my foot. You're halfway through. But now the doors begin to unlock. Halfway. Only halfway. And the worst part? The museum was just beginning to wake up. At 4 a.m., the museum creaked again, but this time, it wasn't just the wind. It was intentional. Something was unlocking. Not just any door. The one that should never be opened. I was standing near the east corridor when I heard its slow, metallic scrape of bolts turning on their own. At first, I didn't want to look. But I had to. That door hadn't opened in 14 years. It didn't even have a handle. No hinges. No label. Just a small brass plate etched with one word. Never. And yet it was open now. Just a crack. But enough for the air around it to turn icy cold. I took a few careful steps closer, keeping my flashlight low. Inside was darkness. Darker than anything I'd ever seen. Not just absence of light, it felt like the absence of space itself. The flashlight refused to cut through it. Its beam just stopped. And then, from inside the dark, a whisper. Not threatening. Not angry. Sorrowful. Almost pleading. Close the door, please close it before she sees you. I tried. I swear I tried to push it shut. But my hands went through the door. They passed through as if it were made of mist. She's not supposed to wake up. You shouldn't be here. None of us should be. That voicey, it wasn't just in my ears. It was in my chest. I turned to run, but my feet wouldn't move. It was like I was standing in molasses, every muscle frozen, except for my eyes. And in that exact moment, I felt her wake up. No sound, no announcement, just a shift in air pressure. A feeling like the building had suddenly leaned closer to me. Then, the tiniest of sounds, click, a single fingernail, tapping against glass. She was inside. There was a painting in that room, oil on canvas. Huge, Victorian, frame covered in dust and iron vines. No one remembered what it depicted anymore because no one dared look. But now, as I stood frozen, I was being dragged toward it. Not physically, mentally. It started as a whisper in the back of my thoughts. Turn your head. Just once. Just peek. But I knew better. Another rule. If the painting calls to you, do not turn around. If it asks to be seen, cover your eyes. If it begins to move, run whether your legs agree or not. I cover my eyes with one hand and turn away. But I heard it anyway. Brushstrokes shifting. Canvas stretching like skin. It was trying to become real. Then I heard footsteps. Sharp. Rhythmic. High heels. Click, 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 but they were coming from inside the room. And that didn't make sense. The floor was carpeted. She wasn't stepping on this floor. She was stepping on something else, and The sound was just echoing into my world. She got closer, and then she spoke. "You're the only one who stayed, so you'll be the one who remembers." Her voice had no age. It wasn't old. It wasn't young. It was timeless. And it hurt to hear. I don't know what she did. Maybe she opened her mouth. Maybe it was the painting. But suddenly the sound that burst out was not human. It shattered every bulb in the corridor. Glass rained down like sharp confetti. I fell to my knees, clutching my ears. But I noticed something odd. My ears weren't bleeding. My nose was. The sound was shaking me from the inside out. Then a burst of wind. Cold. Dry. It sucked all the oxygen from a hallway. And just like that, silence. The door began to close by itself. Slowly. With a final hiss. And that's when I saw it. Just before it sealed shut, there was a set of eyes, human. Tearful. Trapped inside. But they weren't hers. They belonged to someone else. Another guard, maybe the old curator? I'll never know. I always thought they were victims of something ancient or cruel. But then I started to wonder who would do that, and more importantly, why. As I stumbled backward, my phone buzzed violently in my pocket. A new notification. Emergency lock override initiated. The museum has deemed you a threat. I blinked. My hand shook. What did that mean? Me? A threat? I had followed all the rules except one. I stayed. I listened. I heard her voice, which means it was already too late. Because once you hear her, you belong to the museum. However, there's one rule they didn't bother explaining. The one they forgot to add, the one that should be underlined. Twice. Do not go to the roof. They didn't say why. Didn't say what's up there. But someone must have warned that if you hear footsteps going up the staircase, toward it and follow. If the roof door creaks open by itself, pretend it's not real. If something calls your name from above, ignore it. But now the only door left unlocked in the entire building was the one to the roof. I tried to avoid it. I really did. I stayed in the lower halls, tracing my steps back to the lobby. But something was wrong. No matter which direction I walked, no matter how many left or right turns the hallway began to bend. Not just metaphorically. The floor literally tilted under my shoes. And the walls? They started to lean, just slightly, toward the ceiling as if folding upward. Until I found myself standing at the staircase. The one that leads up to the roof. I wasn't the first one. I heard the steps before I even placed my foot on the bottom stair. It sounded heavy, wet, and dragging. It didn't feel like normal walking. No, it was more like sliding. Something was already going up. But there was no one visible on the steps. Only wet footprints. Bare feet. Wide. Too wide. They were left behind on the concrete, as if the body wasn't solid but soaked through, and then the smell hit. It was the stench of rotten flowers. Lilies. Faintly perfumed, but decayed. The scent of an old funeral. By the time I reached the top, I was trembling. The door, solid iron, rusted and locked for years, was wide open. And the sky was wrong. It wasn't night anymore, but it wasn't morning either. It was gray, as if the stars had all burned out and the sun never woke up. I stepped out. The wind hit me instantly, but it wasn't cold. It was empty. Not a breeze. Not a gust. Just pure emptiness brushing against skin like a forgotten breath. And in the center of the rooftop, a chair, wooden, weather-worn, facing nothing, but someone was sitting in it. He didn't move, didn't speak. He just sat there, a man in a faded security uniform, one I'd never seen before. His badge was worn, but I caught the name Ellis. Ellis was the name of the night guard who vanished in 1997. He looked peaceful, except he wasn't breathing. His lips didn't part, but I heard his voice, inside my skull, not in words, not in sound, just meaning. The museum wants you now. You've stayed too long. It remembers you. My knees buckled. The wind rose. Ellis began to disintegrate slowly like dust dissolving into moonlight. He didn't flinch, didn't blink, just looked forward. And as he vanished, the chair stayed behind. Still warm, still waiting. I turned around, ready to run. But the sky had changed. It was no longer gray. Now, letters were forming in the clouds. Black streaks across the heavens, spelling out my name. Over and over, like a scream, burned in silence. Then the whispers came, all around me. Seat, seat, seat. Said I cover my ears. I fell to the ground. I shut my eyes. And when I opened them, the chair was empty again. But now there were two. One where Ellis sat, and one next to it. As I backed toward the door, I noticed something strange about my shadow. It was no longer matching my movements. It lagged behind. It turned its head when I didn't. It raised its arms when mine were still. It smiled, and then it whispered in my own voice, "You're almost done. Just one more hour." But we never leave empty-handed. I turned and ran. Down the stairs. Back in the museum. The roof door slammed shut. Locks clicked into place. I never touched them. And the final thing I saw before descending into the last hour, that second chair on the roof had someone new sitting in it. Me, or a version of me, staring upward, smiling, waiting. I glanced at the clock. 5 a.m. You'd think that would bring relief. But the truth is, the last hour is the worst. The museum doesn't want you here anymore. But it also won't let you leave unless something stays behind. And right now, that something is me. I ran, back down the staircase. I avoided the chairs, avoided the mirrors, and didn't dare say my name out loud. But no matter where I turned, the footsteps followed. Not the echo of my own. These were half a beat late, like someone mimicking me from just behind. I tested it. I stopped. They didn't. I turned, nothing was there. But from that moment on, the footsteps never stopped again. Even when I stood perfectly still, they kept walking. I reached a corridor I hadn't seen before. It shouldn't have existed. Not in the museum's layout. It was narrow and claustrophobic, the walls almost brushing against my shoulders. There were no windows, no exhibits, just whispering. Low, urgent, and constant. Thousands of voices, all speaking at once. All saying the same thing. Give it back. Give it back. Get back. What do they want back? What do I take? I clutched my coat, felt through my pockets, grabbed my phone, all empty. I had nothing. At least, nothing I could see. But something in my chest felt heavier. Like I was carrying someone else's memory. A secret. And the museum wanted it returned. I made it back to the West Wing. To that cursed mirror. I know it wasn't a sane decision. But I had to do something, anything. Only now, the mirror was shattered. Except for one shard till mounted, still glowing faint blue. Except for one shard till mounted, still glowing faint blue. And this time it showed me everything. Not just my face, but a timeline of me. Versions of myself wandering the museum. Different outfits, different expressions. Each one fading out, disappearing after 6 a.m. All but one. One version stayed, sitting in a corner, eyes wide open, mouth sewn shut, forever stuck at 5:59. That's when the realization hit me. This museum, it's a machine. It takes people in, let them wander, let them remember, let them hear things they're not supposed to. And at the end, it doesn't let them go unless something replaces them. I had to trade something, but what? A memory? A truth? A name? I whispered one thing into the air. I know the secret. Instantly, the whispers stopped. The footsteps paused. The walls relaxed. And the main hall door? Unlocked. I could see it. The exit. The outside world. The dark purple sky softening at the edges. Almost morning. I took a step forward, and the air got thicker, like walking through molasses, like something didn't want me to go, like something was coming with me. I looked behind me. No footsteps, but a figure stood in the shadows. My size, my shape, my face, except it had no eyes. Just two hollow spaces, glowing faintly from within. It nodded, as if giving permission, or asking for it. The museum whispered again. Just one sentence this time. Only one version of you may leave. I had to choose. Me or the hollowed shadow. If I left now without looking back, it would take my place. It would carry my memory. It would be forgotten by the world. But I'd be free. But if I turned back, if I reached out, I'd stay. And no one would ever know. I took a step forward. The shadow raised its hand. Waved. Mimicking me exactly like those footsteps. And I walked through the front door. I was out. Cold air hit my skin. Street lights buzzed softly. The sky was lightning, morning was coming. But something was off. The world felt thinner. My phone had no signal. The streets were empty. Not just quiet, vacant. Like I'd stepped into a copy of the outside, not the real thing. Even the traffic lights blinked on random colors. And the museum behind me? No longer there. No towering building. No grand entrance. Just a brick wall. No door. No glass. No sign it had ever existed at all. I checked my wallet. No ID. No cards. Just a single folded note written in my own handwriting. You made it out. But not all of you. I touched my chest. It still felt heavy, like I was carrying something. But I didn't remember what, or who, or why. Only one thing was clear: I wasn't alone inside my own head anymore. Cars returned. Shops opened. People walked past me like I was just another face in a crowd. But I noticed something in every reflection. Shop windows. Puddles. Polished marble. Behind me the shadow. Still there. Still waving. Still smiling. Just waiting. The light changed. Birds began to chirp. The museum, if it ever existed, was gone. Just gone. And so was the weight in my chest. But a new one formed in my thoughts. A question I couldn't shake. Would I give up? I felt emptier, but freer, as if a story had been written inside me and then ripped out. The world was golden again. The warmth, the safety, the peace of the world outside the museum. But the museum still called me. I knew it. It would always call, and I was no longer afraid of museums. But I never entered one again, because I couldn't risk it. What if another one remembered me? What if they asked for their memory back? And worse, what if they didn't let me leave next time? A piece of who I was. A memory I can't even name, but that I now know is missing. It's like a part of me is floating in the ether, just out of reach. Not just a memory, not just a feeling, but a core of myself, the very thing that made me me. I don't know what it was, but I can feel its absence in the way my hands move now, in the way I look at the world, as if I'm seeing it through someone else's eyes. I know it's gone. I can't remember it, but I know it's gone. And every time I look in the mirror, I see a shadow of who I used to be always standing behind me. A step too far, always a step too far from my reach. I can't go back. I can't risk it. What if the next one remembers me? What if it asks for more than a memory? What if the price is something I can't bear to lose? No, I will never enter another museum again, because if I do, I might not be able to leave.
Story 2.
It was spring break, and 3 of my closest friends and I were going on a road trip. Jason, a red-headed oddball who I've known since I was 5 years old and never quite managed to shake off, organized the whole thing. He found an ad advertising an RV return gig. A small company that rented them out had one left in a lot on the East Coast and needed it to be driven back to the main showroom in Montana. With a few clauses, this meant that not only were we getting it for a week for free, but we were also getting paid for the trouble. Or at least Jason was. At a push, the amount he was receiving would just about cover fuel, food, and alcohol, with a little extra thrown in from the rest of us. Jason invited me, of course, Julian, a close enough acquaintance who'd recently come out of a long-term relationship and was trying to start a songwriting career off the back of it, and Austin. Austin had only recently shaken off the nickname Frodo, which had stuck to his 5 feet 3 inches stature all the way through high school. As much as we made fun of him, Austin was a great guy, one of the nicest people I know. With nothing better going on in any of our lives, we all happily agreed to Jason's proposal. With 4 days' notice, I packed a week's worth of clothes into a duffel bag and dropped my dog, Boxer, and my elephant ear plant off at my girlfriend's apartment. My girlfriend, Kate, lives with 2 roommates, one of which apparently is deathly allergic to dog hair. I pretended not to hear her as I turned to leave. We said our goodbyes in the hallway and parted ways for the next week or so. We decided to convene in a shopping mall parking lot, which was near enough for all 4 of us. I was the first to arrive and couldn't stop myself from laughing as I walked up to the RV that would be my home for the next week. One of the windows had shattered and was replaced with a black trash bag duct taped to the seams. It hadn't been cleaned from the last renter's use and was covered in mud that darkened the white beige paint job. The panel door swung open and Jason stood there in a bathrobe. "Welcome to the mothership," he roared. "Nice robe," I said as I shrugged past him and into the van. I threw my bag onto one of the 2 beds, claiming it as my own. "Thanks. I found it on the bathroom floor," he informed me, gesturing towards a closet that was, apparently, where the toilet stood. I looked at him and could tell he wasn't joking. We sat and talked about his grand ideas for the trip while we waited for the other 2 to turn up. As we did, He unfolded a comically large map of the contiguous United States and laid it out on the tiny folding table. Red pen marked our route from Wilmington to Bozeman, cutting mainly through the Appalachian Mountains before heading abruptly north. It's going to average out at around 5 hours of driving a day, he told me, chewing on his pen. Should we go in shifts, or? I asked, leaving the question open-ended. At that, Jason waved his hand in front of me dismissively. No need. I'll be driving, he said. Are you sure? I responded. Totally, he continued. It's the best seat in the house. Besides, Austin still doesn't have his license, and I couldn't put up with Julian complaining about cramps for hours on end. We laughed, and almost on cue the door swung open. Austin and Julian entered in a mock Three Stooges sketch and said their hellos. Jason informed them of the sleeping arrangements, giving Julian the pull-out seating and directing Austin to the floor. After a while, we'd all settled in, and Jason slid behind the wheel. He pulled out of the parking lot and onto the open road, determined to cross state lines before midnight. The three of us, not shackled to the wheel, spent the rest of the evening drinking and playing cards. Julian was halfway through explaining the rules to a card game neither of us had heard before when Jason pulled into a small diner and parked up. We all bundled out of the Winnebago and crowded into the small diner, which wore its Americana charm on its sleeve. We ate well and paid, and as we left, Jason beckoned me over to him. He handed me an old Polaroid camera from his bag and told me to take his picture next to the dented "Welcome to Tennessee" sign. Are you going to do this with every state? I asked him as I took the photo. Absolutely, he replied, grinning and holding onto the metal pole the sign stood on like his life depended on it. We took another photo. This time he posed with his thumbs up before boarding the RV. He drove a little further until we found a place to park up for the night. By this point, 3 out of the 4 of us were hammered. As we got ready to sleep, Austin kept repeating the word Winnebago in a shitty British accent, making a pop culture reference too obscure for any of us to get, drunk or sober. Austin then collapsed onto his makeshift bed of a blow-up mattress supplied by Jason on the RV floor. He was positioned right outside the toilet, which I made a formal prediction would come back to bite him at some point. It did, and I was awoken into our second day on the road by the sounds of birds' song, the howls of Austin, as Julian accidentally stood on him. Today, Jason wanted to see if we could come across some classic roadside attractions. I offered to Google if any were close, but he assured me that it'd be more fun to stop randomly at any we find naturally. Once we finished cooking up camp stove bacon and eggs for breakfast, Jason started driving. We had an hour of playing music and having a good time until the RV started to slow. I looked out the window to see a white, wooden house jutting in from the tree lane. A sign over the door read Aunt Teresa's Chandlery. We abandoned the camper where it was, and all of us, bar Julian, wandered up to the little shop's front door. It opened with a small bell's ring, and we found ourselves surrounded by dripping wax and the smell of herbs. The place had a homely but new-aged feel to it, and I had to keep vigilant so as not to step on one of the cats that swarmed the room. Jason combed inquisitively through the wide selection of candles on sale, while Austin tried to nurse his sudden headache. Just then, the beaded curtain that separated the first room from the next parted, and in walked a young African-American girl, maybe mid to late teens. She had frizzy hair tied back, thick braces, and a purple cardigan. "Oh, hi," she squeaked, chewing gum. "Hey," I replied, and picked up a hexagonal green-blue candle. "Can I buy this?" "Sure," she said, "follow me." I followed her through the waterfall of beads and into a small front room. She ducked behind the counter in the corner and worked the register. The candle was $18, and I realized why they didn't have price tags on anything shortly after buying it. The 3 of us thanked her and left the store. "Charming," said Jason, camera hanging around his neck. $18 of candle, I blurted out, holding the candle in my hands and studying it. Is that normal or overpriced? I've never bought scented candles before, I can't tell. This conversation continued all the way back to the RV and halfway down the road. The rest of the day was spent looking out for more roadside attractions. By dusk, we'd seen a 20-foot tall fiberglass chicken, which claimed to be the biggest in the state. If that wasn't enough, we stumbled across a gimmicky museum dedicated to salt and pepper shakers, as well as a plaque for a freak show performer known as the Eyeball Kid, who was apparently born without a body, whatever that meant. Jason had pictures of them all and seemed possessed by a childlike wonder whenever we spotted something out of the ordinary. We joined up onto the interstate and drove north, passing through Virginia before heading up into the mountainous roads of West Virginia. It was pitch black outside at this point, and with our stomachs full of fast food, we found a semi-safe looking area to park up after the night, which we half hoped, half guessed wasn't on private land. We hadn't been shot at come dawn, so I assumed we guessed correctly. After a breakfast of leftovers and loose fruit, we started driving again. Julian was laying on my bed at the back of the RV, jotting away in a notebook. Austin and I were playing checkers. Jason, as always, was planted firmly behind the wheel. We were driving through a pretty forested, unexceptional rural backwater when it happened. I subconsciously felt the Winnebago slow and noticed as we came to a stop. I glanced out the small window to my left and saw only woodland. Jason undid his belt and slid out of the driver's seat. I watched him as he wordlessly opened the side door and stepped out. I looked back at Austin, who just shrugged. We both moved from our cramped seats and followed Jason outside to see what had gotten his attention. We walked to his side, where he was standing, squinting in the sun. A few yards in front of us was the ocean. The asphalt road petered out into a beige gradient where it met the sandbank. There was a narrow beach running as far as I could see in either direction. Beyond, it was a vast open sea with no hint of land on the horizon. I saw waves lap at the shore, but they made no sound. It was like a mirror, reflecting the blue of the sky. The three of us silently stood where we were, taking in the impossible sight. "Hey guys, why do we holy fuck?" Julian muttered as he crept up behind us. I saw the trees around us on either side of the road stop abruptly where they met the sand line, like the forest had been cut surgically in half. Our confused group cautiously made their way onto the sandy beach, kicking at it as if to prove its existence. "Is this a lake?" asked Austin. "There wasn't one marked on the map," replied Jason as he crouched down by the waterside and looked out at its endless horizon. "And I don't think they could miss something like this." He dipped his hand into the water before bringing it to his nose. I watched in disgust as he brought it down to his mouth, stuck out his tongue, and tasted it. "Salt," he said, spitting onto the asphalt. "It's sea water." "It's not fucking sea water," laughed Julian. "It can't be, that makes no sense." "None. Anyway, salt water lakes are a thing, right?" While the two of them argued, and Austin dug around in the sand with his index finger, I stood and stared, muttering under my breath. Almost to myself, I said, "Strange how the road just stops." It was some time before we saw it. Julian had gone back onto the RV, but the rest of us refused to move on. Jason, Austin, I wanted to explore the beach further and eventually entice Julian out. The four of us made our way down the strip that ran parallel to the tree line. The beach was populated by the occasional shell, smooth stone, or hunk of driftwood. Just after I took Jason's picture and we decided to head back, a small blur appeared on the ocean's rim. Austin spotted it first, and we all stopped to look. The blur reflected the sunlight at odd angles and looked to be drawing nearer. It wasn't that long before we came to the sudden and mutual understanding that it was a boat. The boat, which we were now following intently, was coming to shore and strafing to the right as it did. Our little group kept pace with it, walking what felt like the entire length of the beach. Soon, the boat was near enough to make out the individual ropes and pulleys. I'd only ever been sailing once, and was far from familiar with any nautical terminologies, so pardon me if I make any mistakes. As we turned a bend in shoreline, we came across a rickety-looking wooden pier that continued out maybe 20 yards into the sea. The white paint that covered the panels had all but flaked off, and the many posts were covered in old rope. Despite Jason's enthusiasm, we didn't walk onto the pier until we saw the sailing boat drift elegantly and stop at the end of the dock. Before any of us could say anything, Jason clambered onto the pier and strutted towards the now still ship. First, we called out to anyone who might be in the boat. When we got no reply back, we decided it was safe to explore. Jason was the first on as he eagerly climbed over the ship's railing and onto the deck. Once we made sure that the boat was tied securely to the dock with the thickest length of rope I'd ever seen, we followed him and on. The ship was a medium-sized sailboat, clearly abandoned and left adrift. Still, it wasn't in that bad of a condition. The rigging seemed to be intact, and the wooden floor seemed subject to only minor weathering. While me and Austin were snooping around the top deck, we heard Julian call us from down below. We passed down the hatchway and into the cramped lounge and sleeping quarters. Julian and Jason were slouched over the table, on which was a plate of half-eaten roast chicken and steamed greens, next to a lukewarm cup of coffee. "This is so weird," mumbled Jason to himself, with a tone of wonder and amazement. "Right, I'm going back to the RV," Julian said with a sigh and shrugged past us. Austin and I stood next to Jason and prodded the food with the same shared amazement. Our moment was shattered by Julian's scream. We sounded like a wounded animal, and the three of us rushed up to the top deck to see what had happened. As soon as I did, I stopped and looked around. There was no land anywhere in sight. None. I turned to my friends and saw the same terrifying realization plastered on their faces. Surrounding us, from the boat to the horizon, was open water. When we must have got loose, drifted, Jason began to reason with himself. This was 2 weeks ago. The four of us have been drifting since. We've never seen land, felt hunger, and we just can't settle on how long it's been. For me, at least, we've been drifting for 2 weeks. Austin commits to the idea that we've only been on the boat for a few hours and still busies himself trying to find a way off. Maybe he's right, since my phone, the way I'm getting this message out to you all, still has plenty of juice. Jason sides with me, saying that we've only been here for a few weeks, a month tops. But Julian now sits in the narrow corner of the cabin. He doesn't move, doesn't speak, but in his glassy eyes I can see the despair of years. "Please, I have no idea how you can help us, but you must. You must. If you ever find the ocean where it shouldn't be, then you've found us. Please come searching. You're our only hope."
Story 3.
A phone call came in with the sun and found me sleeping in a shitty hotel bed somewhere deep in the buttholes of southern New Jersey. My head hurt like hell, my stomach was about 3 seconds from turning, and I just wanted to get some rest. But motherfucking Todd couldn't help himself. The dude was like a corporate wind-up doll, born and bred in the basements of corporate America to wake up at the crack of dawn and take everybody's money. "It rained last night, right, Mike?" He coughed through a mouthful of menthol lozenges. I heard water on the roof. And the wind. Geez. The entire building shook like the devil himself was playing maracas. My memory took a few seconds to catch up with the conversation. We've been driving all day through the turnpikes and over endless skyline bridges that hovered high above the factories of the Northeast. We didn't arrive at the dingy little inn until sometime around 9 that night. The lights were all off. The lot was dark. It was drizzling, then at least I thought as much. Anyway, I went out for a cup of coffee this morning. The ground was bone dry. I can't figure out why. An old alarm clock buzzed next to a row of empty bottles. The television blared white static. I wasn't really listening. I couldn't even find my pants. The room bore all of the typical signs of my personal downfall. A large, empty bag of potato chips was stationed by the refrigerator, with a case of Blue Moon carefully placed beside it. The mattress was soaked with sweat and the sheets were twisted about. It looked like somebody either had an exorcism or got drunk watching reruns of family comedies. Given my history, I settled on the latter. "That's not even the weirdest part," Todd whispered. "Nobody's here." I checked the halls, the lobby, bathrooms. The entire building is empty. It's freaky. I took the comment with a grain of salt. Todd had a tendency to worry. That was actually putting it mildly. The man was a full-blown panicker. His fear of flying was the sole reason we were forced to drive 500 miles across the fucking country, shilling shitty software to worse people who didn't care all along the way. His anxieties weren't even the worst part. It was the colossal arrogance that drove me up a wall more than anything else. He was one of those guys that seemed to take sadistic pleasure in competition with the GPS. Every wrong turn was a victory in the battle of Todd versus the technology. That was how we ended up so far off the beaten path. Some people just don't want their tribal knowledge to be lost. I bet he could have stuck that quote in his corny little PowerPoint. Are you ready yet? He asked. Let's go. I don't like this place very much. Something about it gives me butterflies, and not the fun ones. As much as I hated to admit it, he wasn't totally wrong. We booked the rooms through one of those shady discount travel sites, about an hour ahead of showing up there in the first place. The building seemed modern enough. The parking lot was well lit, and the lobby was decorated with hung plasma TVs and new furniture. But when we made it to the front desk to check in, there wasn't a single person around to greet us. No clerks, no guests, nothing. Just a single sign-in sheet, a stack of faded brochures, and a rack full of keys labeled in neat, faded handwriting. We grabbed two at random. Todd shuffled toward his room, and I found a minibar in mine. After that, things got hazy. Seriously, he snapped impatiently. Let's go. I'll meet you in the lobby in 5 minutes. I gave a second before I got out of bed. The nausea eased with a gulp from a plastic water bottle stashed under my pillow. The shower didn't run, and neither did the sink, so that same bottle came in handy when I needed to brush my teeth. I finished getting ready and hated on myself in the mirror a little bit. I wasn't the type to drink myself stupid. It was just a transition period. Nothing was bad. Nothing was good. I was just in a rut. At least that was the excuse. We met by the checkout desk. Nothing had changed. The lobby was quiet and untouched. Chairs were still perfectly angled around fake plants, and the same stack of brochures sat patiently collecting dust on the counter. I looked around for a bathroom that actually worked, but before I could find it, pretentious sneakers squeaked down the hallway behind me. Welcome to scenic White Valley, Todd announced in his best radio voice. Home of absolutely nobody. He looked way too pleased with himself for a Monday morning. His checkered polo was buttoned all the way to his chubby little neck beard, and he wasn't wearing a tie or a blazer, so it was a rare day off from the prototypical uniform. He struck me as the type of guy to read Business Insider's column on how to blend in with your people on the road. I guess the previous day's cufflinks just weren't cutting it. You could almost smell the effort in the form of Draco Noir. Are you driving? He sniffed. I'm ready to take a nap. I looked around for a restroom first. The public one was on the far side of the atrium, past a row of planters and artwork in the form of abstract shapes and buzzwords. I left my bags with the human robot and made my way across the room. The floor was freshly polished, and each step clapped back off the walls with a sharp echo. Inside the bathroom was a single toilet. The tissue dispenser was empty, but the sink still worked. There wasn't a signal on my phone, and the news was a day old. None of my calls or texts were going through. That didn't seem out of the ordinary, though. There hadn't been service for miles. I finished cleaning up and stepped back out into the atrium. Something was off. Everything looked the same. The same tall windows. The same red paint and manicured furniture. But a detail had shifted. Maybe something in the air. I couldn't quite tell what. Like the whole room had been rearranged when I wasn't looking. I turned a corner. Then I saw her. A woman stood beside Todd. She was older looking, with gray-streaked white hair that hung past her shoulders, and eyebrows so thick they formed a single line across her brow. Her uniform didn't match. I don't know why I noticed that first, but I did. The shirt had one logo, and the hat had another. Her pants were too tight, and rolls of stretch mark-ridden skin leaned out the side of the gap in between her shirt. She didn't say anything, initially, and that was the creepiest part of it all. She just sort of stared at me, like she expected something to happen. Todd kept just as still. He shot me a quick look before his eyes dropped to the floor. "Mike," he whispered when he talked. I realized then that I had never heard him be quiet about anything. "I think we better do what this woman asks." I pulled the key out of my pocket and set it on the desk. "All right. Does she want us to check out?" No sooner than the words exited my mouth, a sharp screech ripped across the atrium, loud enough to force us to our knees. The tone shifted up and down in frequency. It was piercing 1 second, then rough the next. I couldn't figure out where it came from until something dropped behind the front desk. My attention shifted to the chalkboard. That's when I noticed the knife. "Go," the woman grunted. "Now." She dragged the blade across the board a second time. It was horrible. Todd screamed, but I couldn't hear his words. I could only see his lips move. We got back up to our feet. and she pointed at the front door. "Go," she repeated. "Now." We got up and walked. The stranger followed. I didn't look back at her. I didn't have to. I could feel her breath hot on my shoulders. Her steps fell into an uneven echo, like her shoes didn't fit or she hadn't moved in a while. I glanced over at Todd, and his normally polished eggshell had already begun to crack. Sweat gathered on his collar and soaked through the pits of his polo. His expression looked like the features on his face had frozen somewhere between apology and panic mode. "Please," he whispered. "I don't know what we've done to offend you. Just let us leave." The knife poked gently into my back. "Go." We kept it moving. The double doors led to a courtyard in front of the building. Outside, the garden was decorated with flowers and benches. The smell of fresh mulch felt like freedom. I could see our car in the lot. There was nobody else parked there. I hoped this mystery woman, fucked as she was, would simply let us get in and drive away. Maybe she thought we were trespassing or whatever, but at least then we could put this whole knife-point encounter behind us. We marched in an awkward sort of procession, and after the first 100 steps, I was sure that we were home free. But just as Todd reached into his pocket to find his keys, the blade slashed across my peripheral vision. Fuzzy white dice fell to the ground. Bright red blood followed. "Go." We walked on. Todd limped beside me. He was quiet now. We left the parking lot behind after a few 100 feet. The manicured landscaping transitioned into a dirt path between dense trees. The forest was quiet. Branches crisscrossed overhead, low enough that we had to duck in places. The woman stayed behind us. A hill rose out of the woods with the early morning fog right above it. We reached the crest. That was when the valley opened up in earnest. "This can't be real." Todd mumbled out in front. "Does nobody work in this town?" A clearing about a mile wide spanned a gap in between the trees. Every inch of it was covered with people. There were parents with kids and folks in uniforms. There were wheelchair-bound patients in hospital gowns and beds with monitors and nurses attached. There were dozens of them, maybe hundreds, but not one of them said a thing. It was disturbing. They were the quietest group of people I had ever seen. Nobody coughed, nobody whispered, nobody laughed. They didn't even seem to look at each other. The only sounds were the steady movement of their feet on the dirt and the soft rustle of clothing that brushed together. A weather-beaten brown building sat at the center of the clearing. It couldn't have been taller than a couple of floors, no wider than about 100 yards. There weren't any roads that led to it, no walkways either. It looked like somebody had just taken the place and plopped it in the center of the valley. The structure itself was in rough shape. Vines crawled across the face of the faded red brick. Weeds gathered around the foundation. The roof sagged in the middle, a drain pipe dangled from the side, and the windows were stained to the point where we couldn't see through, even in the daylight. A sign over the awning read library in chipped white lettering. The woman pointed ahead, and we hustled down the hill to join the crowd. The group was packed tighter towards the front. The people seemed exhausted or angry, even, like the journey had taken everything out of them. Todd tiptoed beside a burly man in pajamas. I fell in a line behind a mother and her 2 young children. I tried to get them to look at me. The kids, the adults, anybody. I wanted to scream, but I could still feel the knife against my back, and every wrong move felt like it could cut my kidney right out of the fat. "My daughter expects me to be home tonight." Todd spoke plainly through the throngs of bodies. "She won't understand why I'm gone." Nobody answered him. The townsfolk were restless by this point, arms and shoulders pressed up against my back. One lady nearly nicked her hand on the knife. A row of heavy boulders had been laid out to form a path through the field. The formation funneled the people into a tight wedge near the door. But they weren't moving. It was like they were stuck. The big man in pajamas shoved a gurney aside and forced his way to the front. He slammed on the oak exterior with his fist 3 times in rhythm. The double door swung open, and then the crowd started to move. The whole line broke apart. Parents ditched their families. Nurses abandoned their patients. The push from the back didn't stop. A few people fell down next to the rocks. One of them was an older man with white hair and a gold t-shirt ripped at the seams. He vanished beneath the weight of rushed footsteps and appeared again, face down in the dirt. "What are they doing?" I shouted over the chaos to the stranger behind us. What the hell is this? She glanced at me and smiled like it was obvious. They're hungry. The crowd rushed into the building like salmon headed upstream to spawn. Dust kicked up behind them. Floorboards creaked under the weight. The stampede was over in about 10 seconds. And then it was quiet. A handful of people hadn't made it inside. Some were moving. Some, like the old man, were not. I'll never forget the look of determination on a teenager with mangled legs and a row of bloodied cuts in his face. He dragged himself toward the door, inch by inch, until a last-minute straggler shoved him back down. His skull hit a rock with a sickening crack. He didn't move after that. Go, the woman gestured. Inside. We did what she told us. The inside of the library looked like it had been furnished by someone with a very small budget and a fond memory of the year, 1997. The walls were pale green and covered in laminated newspaper clippings about science fairs and fundraisers. The chairs were upholstered in faded fabric and arranged around metal tables stacked with old magazines. An empty fish tank sat on a low shelf, but there wasn't any water, just a plastic log and a thin layer of gravel. What the heck are we doing here? Todd spat. We have a right to know. The stranger tilted her knife towards a staircase tucked into the back corner of the room. She seemed more agitated than before, almost antsy. Her eyes were bloodshot, and she kept scratching her neck until the skin turned red. Her fingernails were peeled and bloodied. There was a look on her face like a crackhead hungry for a fix. Go. The air got hotter as we climbed. The steps rose above a long and narrow hallway where the mob had already vanished from view. At the top was a plain gray door with the word storage labeled at the top. Our captor fiddled with the lock for a second. Then she poked the broadside of the blade into Todd's back. Inside, the room was small and slanted at the edges, almost like a makeshift attic office. A closet took up the far corner. Two narrow windows let in bright sunlight that illuminated a thin strip like tape across the wood paneling. The air smelled of old carpet and moldy paper, combined with something sharp and chemical. "Stay here," the woman shouted. "No leave." And with that, the door slammed shut. A lock clicked behind it. Todd paced around the narrow space in tight circles. His breathing got heavy. He swallowed hard and pressed a hand to his chest. He looked like he was about to pass out. For a second, I thought I was going to have to catch him. "We need a way out," he babbled. "Mike, we can't stay up here. You understand that, right?" I didn't say anything back. There had to be something useful in the room, something we could use to defend ourselves or help us escape. I tried the windows, and they were rusted shut. I pressed my palm into the glass and shoved. Nothing moved. What are we going to do? The closet was next. A cardboard box sat near the back with a faded Home Depot logo stamped on the side. I pulled it out and crouched to check the contents. Inside was a toolbox that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. A broken level sat beside a pair of pliers with the grip half melted. An old, rusted hammer rested on top. This will work. I went back to the closet to take another look. A gap in the floorboards had opened where the toolbox had been. Pale light bled through the cracks. The smell coming off it was stronger than before, and it was thick with chemicals, something like bleach or melted plastic. It stung a little when I breathed it in. Do you hear that? At first, I thought it was the pipes, but the sound didn't match anything I'd heard before. It was a rhythmic clicking in steady, gurgling intervals, almost like wet lips trying to keep time over a beat. I dropped down to the ground and pressed my eye to the gap in the floorboards. That's when the room beneath us opened up, and I knew we'd stepped into something we weren't meant to see. "What is it?" Todd snapped. "What's happening?" The main hall was massive, but everybody was gathered around the center. A row of pushed-together desks guarded 3 thick steel drums. A small group of young women in white moved between them in slow, deliberate circles. Each of them dragged long-handled ladles through the surface through pools of translucent orange liquid. The whole crowd watched them work in silence while the concoction bubbled like lava and melted cheese. "Not sure," I muttered. "Looks like they're lined up for something." A figure stepped into view from the furthest queue. I recognized the face. He was the same kid from earlier, the one who cracked his skull on the pavement. Something about the way he moved just seemed wrong. The bones in his legs bent at awkward angles. Each step was like watching a puppet try to figure out its strings. His face was pale and streaked with dried blood, but he didn't seem to mind the cuts and bruises. He just kept going, arms at his side, eyes ahead. "This is weird," I muttered out loud. "Now, they're getting ready to eat." The teenager shuffled in front of the vats. He seemed to be the first of the townsfolk to be seen by the lunch ladies from hell. They swarmed him in a group. One of them looked him up and down. Another sniffed him by the collarbone, apparently satisfied with the result. The two of them scurried out of the way, while a third forced the kid down to his knees in front of the bile. She lifted a utensil to his nose. She pinched his nostrils. She waited. After a moment, a pale white slug forced itself free. "Oh my God," I covered my mouth to keep from vomiting. "This is sick." The woman caught the thing in her dish before she walked toward a smaller drum at the back of the room. She lowered it inside carefully, like it was made of glass. The kid went limp. One of the others stepped in behind him and gently dunked his head into the orange slop. He screamed when the second slug emerged from the slime. Then he sobbed as it crawled across his mouth and up his nose. "They're parasites," I muddled my words trying to explain. "They're inside of them." The kid twitched. His eyes rolled back. For a second, I thought he was about to collapse again. Then his whole body seized. He snapped upright and started laughing. It was a hysterical, panicked, frenzied sort of laughter. The type where you have to catch your breath in between. He bolted across the room and slammed his head into a wall. Then he bounced off and did it again. And again. He dropped to his knees and stared at the blood on his hands. Then he licked them, slowly, as if he was savoring the taste. Todd reached around me and pulled the hammer off the toolbox. I couldn't stop him. Everything happened too fast. There wasn't any time to react. He stepped past me and smacked the window with one clean smash. The glass cracked and blew apart. Shards bounced across the floor. I was still looking through the crack in the floorboards when the energy shifted. Every head in the hall below snapped toward me. Not toward the window. Not the noise. Me. Like they knew exactly where I was. Like they'd just been waiting for a reason. And then they started a run. The teenager was the fastest. He pushed the others out of the way as he dropped to all fours and sprinted to the door at the end of the long hallway. I got up and started to move myself. Todd was trying to force himself out of the window, but he didn't quite fit. His pants were torn where the jagged pieces bit deep into his legs. His shirt was covered in red. He twisted hard, trying to shove through, but the frame scraped him raw. He yelled back at me as footsteps rushed up the steps. Then he turned around. There was something evil in his eyes when he hit me. I slammed into the floor hard. My head bounced against the tile, and everything got slow. My ears rang. My vision pulsed at the edges. I could still hear him moving somewhere above me. Todd. He was angry about something. The door burst open. The mob poured in. The man in pajamas spotted him first. Todd had one foot out the window, but the cuff of his khakis was caught on the radiator. He couldn't move. The big guy yanked him by the ankle and pulled him back inside. The rest of them screamed like animals. They clawed at his arms and dragged him across the floor. Todd kicked. He begged. He said he was sorry. He said he didn't mean to. They didn't care. They hauled him out the door and back down the stairs, still yelling, still pleading for me to come and save him. And then it was quiet again. I waited by the door for a few seconds, just long enough to know they weren't coming back. The screams didn't stop. They only got worse. Todd's voice had turned hoarse and jagged, like he swallowed some sandpaper. There weren't any words to be heard anymore, just guttural moans. The mob loved it. They made these horrible little noises. Snorts. Gasps. Something that almost sounded like applause. They were excited now, and that horrific fucking clicking sound didn't stop, either. It only got louder. I stepped through the doorway and into the hall. My legs wobbled. My skull throbbed. The world tilted every few steps, but I didn't stop. I just walked. Down the steps. Through the library. And out the front door. For a moment, I felt guilty. I really did. But then I thought about the hammer. And those stupid fucking khakis. And all of the horribly condescending moments that led to the one when that cowardly, selfish little asshole tried to sacrifice me so that he could survive. And then I just kept moving. The woods were cold and dark then. The early morning had given way to a gentle rain that slipped through the trees and clung to the branches. Mud sucked to my shoes. Branches scratched at my shoulders. I followed the same path we took in and ended up in the field that led to the parking lot. Our car was still parked at the back. I spotted the keys with the little white dice in the gravel where we left them, wet and smeared with blood. I picked them up, unlocked the door, and slid into the driver's seat. I stared through the windshield for a while. Then I started the engine and drove away. That night, I reported everything to the police in my hometown. I felt safer there. I expected they'd ask me more questions, maybe even think I had something to do with it. Maybe I did. I still couldn't shake the guilt of leaving my coworker behind. Before long, the secretary returned and told me they had located Todd. They spoke to him on the phone, and he was a little shaken up, but alive and well. I couldn't believe it. 2 days later, a postcard arrived in the mail. Greetings from scenic White Valley, signed, Todd K. That's it for today's creepy Reddit tales. Before we go, I just want to say a quick thanks to all of you for watching, liking, and sticking around. You guys keep this channel going, and I'll be back soon with more stories that'll make your skin crawl. Drop a comment if you've got your own spooky tale to share, and I'll see you in the next one.